Did you experience some beautiful spiritual opening, maybe because of meditation, maybe because of psychedelic journeys, and you're now going through a pretty dark time? If so, this video is going to be perfect for you because I'm going to teach you about the dark night of the soul, or as we call it in the Buddhist meditative tradition, the insights into suffering. So the dark night of the soul is made of several different layers. So I spent around a 5 months silent retreat period, really exploring in depth all these different layers of this dark night of the soul. Suffice to say that it was not so much fun, but I learned a lot about the different layers of this very difficult and painful stage of the spiritual path. So this different stages of the dark night of the soul is actually coming from a book called The Path of Purification, or the Visuddhimagga, which is a 2,000-year-old meditation manual that was written 500 years after the Buddha. So it's a pretty interesting elucidation of the different stages of the spiritual path. So let's get started, shall we? So the first stage of the dark night of the soul is what we call dissolution. So usually there's some kind of big spiritual opening, as I covered in my last video about Kundalini awakening. So usually after this beautiful opening subsides, we come into the stage of dissolution. In the stage of dissolution, it becomes very, very difficult to meditate. It becomes very difficult to place your attention on different objects of attention. Also, sometimes it can become very difficult to walk straight, as it seems like the world is a bit wobbly. It can feel a bit like walking on a boat sometimes. Just another caveat here is that each stage that I cover here, there's so much to say about each of these stages, so I'm not going to give you the whole explanation about each stage, but just enough information so that you can look at your experiences from the past and see maybe one of these stages was in your experience. But as always, it's always helpful to discuss this with a qualified teacher who has enough experience as opposed to self-diagnosis. So after the stage of dissolution, in which we start to see the endings of everything, the endings of thoughts, the endings of experiences, the endings of everything. Basically, our attention is focused on the end section of everything. So after dissolution comes the stage of fear. As the name of the stage, such is the experience. We can start to become very, very afraid of dying. We can have different kinds of visions of death, of disease, of bodies rotting. There can be a sense of bodily anxiety that comes because we start to notice that there is nothing solid in this world. Nothing internally that is solid and nothing externally. The whole world is constantly in a flux or a flow. After the stage of fear, we come to the stage of misery. What a beautiful name for a stage. In the stage of misery, what I recall from my very long silent retreat was that there can be a lot of different sensations of illness. You can feel as if you have a fever, but actually in terms of actual physical health, you may be completely healthy. There can be a lot of feelings of grief in different body centers, energy centers, so in the chest, in the throat. There can be a lot of feelings of, as the stage name, such as the stages of misery. After that, we come to the stage of disgust. In the stage of disgust, there can be an aversion to food, even a sense of nausea in the belly. There can be really an aversion to food in general, to human beings. Everything can seem a bit disgusting. And after that, we come to the beautiful name of the stage called desire for freedom. Desire for freedom is simply as the stage name, such as the feeling. One just wishes to escape from all this suffering. And lastly, after the desire for freedom, we come into the name of a stage which is called reobservation, which is basically an experience of dissolution, fear, misery, disgust, and desire for freedom again and again and again. So these are just, as the dark night of the soul is a very complex phenomena, these are just ways of breaking it down into small sections. However, it may not be helpful for your experience to do so. What's really helpful is actually continuing to practice. So I'm going to go through some helpful advice for people going through the dark night of the soul. And what I found over my experience over the past 15 years, what has helped me, what I learned from my teachers and my mentors. And so the first thing is, it's super important to continue to have some kind of spiritual practice, because if you had a spiritual opening, maybe because of psychedelics, or maybe because of meditation practice or some yoga practice, and you stop practicing, this dark night of the soul phenomena is still going to exist in some layer of your consciousness, and you're going to feel quite, it can be like a spiritual depression, and so that's why it's super important to continue to practice. And the next piece of advice is support. It's so helpful to have the support of someone who has gone through the same experiences, and so finding a teacher or a community of practitioners, just so that you're not going through this alone, is super important and helpful. The third piece of advice is physical exercise can be extremely helpful when going through the dark night of the soul. Because in the stages of the dark night of the soul, there can be a lot of grief, there can be a fixation on negativity, and physical exercise has this beautiful way of putting us back in connection with the body. And it also releases endorphins, and it can really help with the kind of spiritual depression of the dark night of the soul. Another thing that can be super helpful is meditation retreats. So going on a meditation retreat with a teacher who is properly qualified to help you to go through these stages is super helpful, because it can push your practice forward. Whereas if you're doing self-practice at home, you may not be practicing enough, and this may mean that the stages of the dark night of the soul may take longer to pass through. So going on some meditation retreats can be helpful, maybe 3 days, maybe a week, maybe 10 days, or I did this for maybe 2 and 3 months, but not everybody wishes or can afford to go for such long periods of time, but it can definitely be helpful. Another thing I found to be useful is dancing. So if you enjoy dancing or not, I don't know, but it can help you to dance through all these feelings of grief and all these dark feelings. It can be super helpful. Try signing up to some dance class that you've never gone through. Maybe some ecstatic dance, maybe some Gaga classes or whatever. Just express your difficulty through the body. Can be very helpful, especially for those of us who are very cognitively inclined. And the last note here is that in the dark night of the soul, we can be so fixated on our own spiritual depression that we forget to be grateful for all the beautiful things that exist in our life. And so volunteering or helping others, helping friends, helping some family members, really aligning yourself with giving support to somebody else can be really helpful to get out of your own mind, get out of your own suffering, and actually notice that there's a lot of beautiful blessings in your life, and kind of forgetting a little bit about this dark night of the soul phenomena. So this has been a super short elucidation of what the dark night of the soul is, or as we call it in the Buddhist tradition, the insights into suffering. If you want more of my help, you can click some of the links below for the free Facebook community, my free balance of mind training, or you can schedule a free consultation and speak to me personally. And I'll speak to you soon.